So in plant kingdom, we have studied different groups of organisms like algae, bryophytes, pterodophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So far we studied about algae in plant kingdom. Now after the study of algae, so algae are a group of organisms which are thalloid. The plant body is thallus, not well differentiated into stem, root and leaf. And also we have studied about the classification of algae, which have been grouped under 3 groups, that is green algae, brown algae and red algae. Then economic importance of algae. So algae are used for various purposes. They are highly economically important organisms. Now the next group of organisms are the bryophytes. So algae, bryophytes, then pterodophytes and gymnosperms. So these are the 3 next groups. So after this, angiosperms. Bryophytes, pterodophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms. Now bryophytes, they are developed than algae. That means when we study about their structure, they are comparatively developed than the algae organisms. Now bryophytes, they are also non-vascular plants. That means they don't contain xylem and phloem. They don't contain vascular tissues. The bryophytes are same as that of algae in when we consider the vascular tissues. Algae are also non-vascular. Bryophytes are also non-vascular. Algae are also chlorophyll containing organisms. Bryophytes are also chlorophyll containing organisms. So that means that they are autotrophic automatically. So when they are containing chlorophyll, they are having the capacity of conducting photosynthesis, and thus bryophytes are also autotrophic in nature. Now these are primitive kind of plants. They are primitive non-vascular plants. And so algae and bryophytes are non-vascular. Now when we come further, they are vascular when we come to the next group. Now one by one about studying each about the bryophytes. So bryophytes are plants growing in usually marshy areas, damp soils, either it may be on the moist rocks or in the old walls or even on the land where there is moisture, and on the even on the bark of the trees, tree trunks, there also bryophytes are found. Then these bryophytes, they are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. They are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. Now amphibians, it is actually a group of animals which includes frog, salamander and many others. Now this amphibians, amphi means 2, double, bio, life. So double life. Now we call amphibians because the frog, it lives on land as well as in water. We see frog also lives on land. It will be jumping and it will be moving on the land also. It will also live in the water. So that means there is no any difference, means it does not get any difficulty when it is on land or when it is in water. It is adjustable to both type of conditions, on land conditions as well as water conditions. Now bryophytes, that means frog requires both land and water. Then bryophytes are so called amphibians because they require both land and water. Actually bryophytes live on land They are not found floating or like that, but bryophytes are usually growing on damp soils, wet soils, that means on land. But for reproduction, for sexual reproduction, they require water compulsorily. So it is an obligatory for the reproduction. So that means for its growth and development it requires land. For reproductive phase it requires water. That means the life cycle gets completed on land and water. Hence they are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. So sometimes it is asked, why bryophytes are called as amphibians of the plant kingdom? Because they live on land for their growth, and for sexual reproduction they require water. That is why they are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. And in bryophytes we come across two stages of plants, Sporophyte and Gametophyte. So we come across two stages in the plant development. Now what is this Sporophyte and Gametophyte? Now the Gametophyte, the word itself will suggest it is the part of the plant, it is the stage of the plant which produce gametes, or in other words which involves in sexual reproduction. So Gametophyte is the part of the plant, it is the stage of the plant which produces gametes, male and female gametes. So when we say gametes, it means it is the sexual reproduction. Now Sporophyte means it is a part of the plant which produces spores. So it is asexual reproduction. So Sporophyte is the part which produces the spores and involves or plays the asexual reproduction. So the Sporophyte and Gametophyte, how they are present in the plant. Now the Sporophyte is completely depending upon the Gametophyte. It is dependent. So when the Sporophyte is produced by the plant, or when the Sporophyte is produced, it cannot survive independently. But Gametophyte can survive independently. It is because it is capable of the photosynthesis. It contains chlorophyll. But the Sporophyte part does not contain chlorophyll. So that is why the Sporophyte, for its growth or for its development, it is completely depending on the Gametophyte. In other words, it is parasitic, or it is depending on the Gametophyte. Now the Gametophyte is a part which produces the gametes, the male gamete and the female gamete. So they produce, and that part of the plant undergoes sexual reproduction. Now when the zygote is formed during sexual reproduction, that is by the union of the male and female gamete, the zygote which is developed during sexual reproduction, it will develop into the Sporophyte actually. So the Gametophyte, in other words, gives rise to the Sporophyte. The Gametophyte which produces the gametes, it involves the reproduction, fertilization takes place between male and female gametes, and the zygote is formed. So that zygote which is formed, it divides and forms the Sporophyte. Now the Sporophyte in this Bryophytes, it is divided into three parts: the foot, seta and capsule. So these are the three parts of the Sporophyte. So the foot is the basal part of the Sporophyte, which is actually attached to the Gametophyte, and the seta is the stalk, the upper part of the foot, which is the part of the Sporophyte, and the terminal part of the Sporophyte is the capsule. So the capsule is the part which contains spores. So spores are produced actually in the capsule. So this capsule contains the spores, and those spores are released, and the spores are minute, usually spherical, unicellular structures, and they are released by the rupture of the capsule, and the spores are carried in different directions by wind, water, and even by certain animals like birds and all that. So these spores which are produced by the sporophyte, they are carried. So when they fall on the suitable medium like wet soil or damp soils, so there the spores develop into the gametophyte. So the sporophyte gives rise to the gametophyte. The gametophyte develops into the sporophyte. That is the meaning. So this sporophyte gives rise to the spores. So the spores which are produced, it gives rise to the gametophyte. But before giving or developing into the gametophyte, it may produce some intermediate stage like what is called as protonema. So then it will produce the sporophyte, this gametophyte. Then the gametophyte is formed from the sporophyte. This is how the gametophyte gives rise to the sporophyte. So in bryophytes, the sporophyte develops into spores or gives rise to spores. So the spores develop either directly into a gametophyte, or they produce an intermediate stage and then they give rise to the this gametophyte. So protonema is an intermediate stage between the sporophyte and the gametophyte. So the spores which are produced by the sporophyte, they are released when they fall on a suitable medium. So they germinate directly into gametophyte in some bryophytes. But usually in the primitive bryophytes, means in the primitive bryophytes means in bryophytes again there are two groups. Some group which are called as the liverworts actually. So liverworts are one group of bryophytes, and mosses are another group of bryophytes. So bryophytes can be divided again into two groups like liverworts and mosses. So this in usually liverworts we don't come across protonema. In mosses we come across. Mosses are developed bryophytes in their structure, in their morphology, in their form, and so that is what is the sporophyte and gametophyte. So sporophyte is the part of the plant where the spores are produced, and these spores which are released, they develop into this gametophyte. In some the spores directly give rise to gametophyte, and in some the spore develops into a stage called as protonema, and then the protonema will give rise to the gametophyte. Now again in the protonema, when we go into still more about that, there are again primary protonema and secondary protonema. That means again in some bryophytes, somewhat developed bryophytes, the spore will develop into primary protonema. Then the primary protonema will give rise to secondary protonema. Then the secondary protonema will give rise to the gametophyte. But however, in still other bryophytes, the protonema is only one. The spore will develop into protonema and protonema into the gametophyte. So then the gametophyte, which is independent. So this gametophyte, which is independent, it produces the male and female sex organs, that is the male and female gametes, and then by the process of fertilization, it gives rise to the zygote. So the zygote develops into the sporophyte. But the sporophyte which is developed from the zygote, it cannot live independently. It is completely depending on the gametophyte for its nutrition or for its growth. So that is in case of bryophytes we come across this. Then when we come to the reproduction, already in gametophyte we have mentioned there is sexual reproduction. Now reproduction also takes place by vegetative method. So asexual and sexual already we have mentioned. Asexual means it is in sporophyte. Sexual means it is in gametophyte by the production of gametes. But in vegetative method also there is which is occurring in the bryophytes. So vegetative method takes place by fragmentation, or it is also taking place by structures which are called as tubers, or there are also structures which are called as gymnae. So fragmentation by tuber formation, by the formation of gymnae. Now fragmentation means now when the bryophyte plant is present, accidentally when the plant gets broken or cut off into small parts, fragments. Now each fragment is capable of developing into a new plant. So such kind of fragmentation we also come under algae. So in algae also, in filamentous algae or like that, in unicellular algae there is no question of fragmentation. The cell will divide. But in filamentous algae which are having many cells, so if the filament gets cut off, same way here when the plant body, thallus, so bryophyte also is a thallus. So we don't come across well developed leaves, stem and root here. So here the fragmentation is by separation into small fragments. Each fragment is capable of developing into a new plant. That is fragmentation. Tubers means these are small structures which are produced on the thallus. So they are bulb-like structures, and they are certain spherical bodies which appear or develop on the thallus, and they get separated, and they are capable of developing into a new plant. That is tuber. Now gymnae are also some structures produced on the thallus. Now especially in liverworts we come across gymnae. So in liverworts what happens, on the surface of the thallus small cup-like structures they are formed. So these small cup-like structures which appear on the thallus, so they are called as gymnae. So this gymnae are vegetative bodies. They separate from the thallus when they completely get matured or developed. They separate, and when they fall on a suitable medium, they are capable of giving rise to a new plant or a new thallus body. That is how the reproduction takes place in the by vegetative method. Now in addition to this, bryophytes, they are also useful for as a food for certain animals when we come to their economic importance. So this is about the bryophytes. So they are non-vascular, one character. They are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom because they live on land for their growth and require water for reproduction. The plant body can be differentiated into sporophyte and gametophyte. So sporophyte is the part which produces the spores, gametophyte is the part which produces the gametes and involving sexual reproduction. Then the sporophyte is dependent on gametophyte, where the gametophyte is independent. It is not depending on any sporophyte or like that. Then reproduction takes place by vegetative, sexual and asexual. So asexual means by spores, sexual means by the production of gametes. So vegetative method takes place by fragmentation, tubers and even by gymnae. So bryophytes are classified into two groups, liverworts and mosses. Now under liverworts we come across different examples like Rixia, Markantia and many others. Under mosses we come across like Funaria, Polytrichum is another example. So these are some examples to mention in the groups. These are the examples of the bryophytes. So Rixia, Markantia, they are very simple bryophytes. Primitive bryophytes means among bryophytes these are very primitive. But whereas the mosses like Funaria and Polytrichum, they are developed bryophytes, somewhat comparative. Developed in the sense, in comparison with the liverworts, they are developed in their structure. So to give an idea, Rixia, if you see, it is a small plant which looks like this. This is how the plant body looks like. It is a flat, thick, leaf-like, green in color. And this Rixia and Markantia, they appear like this. So there is some minute difference between Rixia and Markantia. So these are flat, and on the lower side we come across some root-like structures which help the plant to fix to the soil or that substratum, to that surface. So that means there is no differentiation of leaf, root and stem. Now this small green flat structure, it is present on the surface, and on the lower side there are root-like structures. So when we see them, they appear like root, but they are not true roots. They are called as rhizoids. So these rhizoids, which are root-like structures, they help the plant to fix to the soil. That is how the Rixia and Markantia looks like. Now on this surface, we come across the tubers and gymme. Follow. And on this surface, we come across the reproductive organs. So that means the male and female reproductive organs, which forms the gametophyte. Then from the gametophyte, the sporophyte is developed on the same plant. So the sporophyte develops on the gametophyte, and that is seen in the Rixia and Markantia. Then in the Funaria plant or the mosses, so when we study the plant, now these are slightly developed. Suppose this is a soil. In this we come across a stem-like structure, and there are root-like structures, and there are leaf-like structures like this. So this is how actually the Funaria plant looks like. It is a very small plant, a few centimeters in length on that soil. So you can see small leaf-like structures, but they are not true leaves. We can see a small stem-like structure, and it is not a true stem. We can see small root-like structures. They are called as the rhizoids. So that means better than the liverworts, these are developed. That means here we come across leaf-like, stem-like, root-like structures. But here we come across only root-like structures and this flat body of the plant. That is in case of this liverworts. And these liverworts are so called because in the ancient period it was believed that they were used for the treatment of the liver, and that is why they are called as the liverworts. But however, now it is not used because more effective medicines or treatments are available, and that is why they are named as liverworts. So mosses, they are actually soft plants, hence they are called as mosses. Moss means soft. So Funaria is a small plant. Now Funaria can be seen growing on old walls. Now whenever we see an old wall, we can see some green carpet-like structure. So that green carpet which is seen on the wall, it is when we closely observe that, you can see small grass like plants growing on that. So it appears like a grass. So when we closely observe, it is not actually grass, it is moss like funaria, or even it may be polytrichum. So that is where these liverworts and mosses grow. So mosses which also include another material called another example called as sphagnum, which is also an important bryophyte. Important in the sense it is economically important. It is used as an antiseptic material. So that means for treatment it is used, and then it is used as a substitute for cotton. So that means in some countries where there is no cotton available, so usually we use cotton for the bandages or for cleaning the wounds or like that, because of its soft nature. So instead of cotton, why we are not using any other things? Because they are somewhat rough in nature, and they are not soft as like the cotton. So we use cotton to clean wounds which does not harm to that region. So this cotton, which is a soft material, it is used for wounds in hospitals like that. But when the cotton is not available, this sphagnum can be used. So the plant sphagnum is soft in nature, and that sphagnum can be used, or it is used as a substitute for cotton. So that is the uses of the sphagnum and the mosses like that. So these are this is about the bryophytes. So bryophytes are commonly divided into liverworts and mosses. So those are the characteristics of bryophytes. Then coming to the pterodophytes. So pterodophytes are developed than bryophytes. This is one important thing. So from pterodophytes, here all plants are vascular. This is very important character. Algae and bryophytes are non-vascular, no vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. And if there is no xylem and phloem, the parenchyma which is present in this thallus, even in algae, so those parenchyma tissue will absorb and transport the water and food materials. So similar to xylem and phloem, these cells do, but the function may be somewhat different. So it may not be efficient as that of xylem and phloem. When we say xylem, xylem is very efficient in water conduction of water and minerals. When we speak of phloem, it is an efficient tissue which transports food materials. Followed. But here, in case of absence of the vascular tissues, the parenchyma will do that. It may be slow comparatively than that of the phloem and xylem, that is the vascular tissues. But however, there is also transport of water, there is also transport of food, but not efficient or not effective as that of the vascular tissues. That is about this vascular tissues and non-vascular. So the bryophytes are non-vascular. These are plants but non-vascular plants. But algae are also plant, they belong to plant kingdom. They are not well developed as bryophytes. They are also non-vascular. Now this coming to the pterodophytes. So as these are vascular, so these are developed plants, and no presence of thallus here. So as the vascular tissues were absent here, so the body is not well developed. So that is why it is not differentiated into stem, root and leaf, true root, stem and leaves. But in pterodophytes, we come across well developed root, stem and leaves. So there is a true root, stem and leaves in case of pterodophytes. That is what is seen. So pterodophytes are having true root, stem and leaves, but here there is no true root and hence it is having thallus. So thallus is present here. So here there is no question of thallus. When we say thallus, it means that this true root, stem and leaves are not there. But in pterodophytes we are having, and they are having vascular tissues. So the plants are well developed. There is a root, stem and leaves. Then coming to the Sporophyte and Gametophyte. Here also the Sporophyte is present and Gametophyte is present. So both we come across here. There is a Sporophyte and Gametophyte. So the Sporophyte and Gametophyte in case of pterodophytes. So this produces spores. So this produces the gametes. And one important thing here is both are independent. This is the difference between bryophytes and pterodophytes. In bryophytes, sporophyte is dependent on gametophyte. It is not independent. But however, gametophyte is independent. But here both are independent. So when sporophyte is formed, it lives independently. When gametophyte is formed, it lives independently. So sporophyte means it produces spores, same as asexual reproduction. But these spores, they are produced in leaves. Here the spores are produced in capsule. So the sporophyte contains these three parts: foot, seta and capsule. So the sporophyte, the base of the sporophyte is the foot. The middle part, which is a stalk-like structure, seta. The upper part, which is a bag-like structure, it is called as capsule, which contains the spores. But in the pterodophyte, the sporophyte is present in the leaves of the plant, because there are true leaves here. Here there are leaves, but they are not true leaves. They are leaf-like structure. That is only in mosses. But in the leaves, the sporophyte produces in the leaves. Now the leaves which produce the spores, the leaves when they become matured, these leaves are called as sporophylls. So the leaves which produces the spores, they are called as the sporophylls. Now actually, to give an idea, suppose this is a leaf of the plant, just imagine. So this leaf produces spores in structures which are called as sporangia. So these sporangia, they are present in certain regions of the plant, leaf, like this. So these are the regions where sporangia are present. The sporangia are not present throughout the whole part of the leaf. Only in some part, only in certain regions we find sporangia. So these sporangia, they are produced in some regions of the leaves. They appear like small brownish, dark brownish spots, patches. So these dark brownish patches, they contain sporangia. Sporangium single, is a small bag-like structure as the capsule is there. So this sporangia is a small bag-like structure. They can be seen by the help of naked eye. They are very small. So when we observe under the microscope, these sporangia contain spores. So the sporangia contain spores. So as the capsule contains spores there, the sporangia contains spores. So these spores, they are released from the leaves. So we can see these sporangia or small spots, and these spots they are actually called as sori. That small dark brownish spot patch is called as sorus single, sori plural. In each sorus there are sporangia. The sporangia contain or produce spores, and these sori, they are usually produced on the lower part of the leaf. See, pterodophytes, they are large plants, but whereas bryophytes are very small plants. They do not grow very tall, but the pterodophytes grow up to a few feet in height, 2, 3 or like that feet, not as large as the trees. So these leaves, when we call them as a sporophyll only when they produce the sori and the sporangia. That is what are sporophylls, what are sporangia and sori. Now the sori which are produced here, so these sori are produced only on the lower part of the leaf, sporophyll. So just by seeing the leaf, we can identify that it is a pterodophyte. So pterodophytes, some of the pterodophytes are ornamentally grown in pots, and they do not produce any flowers. So there is no question of flower at all here. So this pterodophytes which are usually grown as ornamental, they are usually called as ferns. So ferns are one group of pterodophytes which are commonly called as, but actually in classification we don't come across that word. So ferns are a group of pterodophytes which are ornamental and grown for their decorative purposes in front of the large buildings or houses like that. So they are grown in pots. So whenever you see any large building where a large number of pots are grown, so there to identify whether that plant is a pterodophyte or not, so you observe the pots which are growing there. You observe the plants. If you observe such a plant where the leaf is having small dot-like structures on the lower surface or in its lower surface, so these spots are nothing but the regions where the sporangia are present. They are the sporophylls which help in the asexual reproduction, and they produce the spores. So these spores are released from the sporangia. So the sporangia, I said, they are a small bag-like structure. The sporangia will break, and the wall of the sporangium will get ruptured when the spores are completely developed. So these spores, they are released, means they fall. The spores, when they fall, they are carried by wind or water in different places. When the spores fall on a suitable medium, on a fertile soil, moist soil like that, so the spores will germinate and form a multicellular structure. So this multicellular structure is somewhat heart shaped or like that. It is a small structure of few centimeters, 2 or 3 centimeters in size, so that the spore is microscopic, we cannot see. When it falls on the suitable medium, it will start dividing by mitosis, and thus mitosis, the spores will develop into a multicellular structure which is somewhat heart shaped, and it is green in color. So this structure is the gametophyte. So the gametophyte of a pterodophyte is also called as Prothalis. So remember. So don't get confused with the thallus of the algae and the bryophyte. Thallus means it is the plant body which is not differentiated into root, stem and leaves. in algae and bryophytes. The word Prothalis is used only for the gametophyte of the pterodophytes. Of course, the sporophyte gives rise to gametophyte, but the gametophyte is independent. See here. So the sporophyte is the plant which we grow, and that plant produces the spores in the leaves. Those leaves are called as the sporophylls, and the sporophylls contain sporangia, and these spores are carried to different directions, and the spore will develop into a multicellular structure called as gametophyte. So that gametophyte is independent. It is not growing on the gametophyte, or it is not growing on the sporophyte, or like that. So that gametophyte, it is a small structure. It is just like a piece of a leaf. It is somewhat flat, green in color, and usually heart shaped or like that. It is somewhat oval also sometimes. So this leaf like structure or this flat structure, it is the gametophyte. It is green in color, so it is capable of its nutrition, and it is also called as Prothalis. So the gametophyte of pterodophytes is called as Prothalis. Sometimes questions are asked, what is Prothalis? So don't get confused. What is thallus? That is different. What is Prothalis? That is different. So what is Prothalis means it is the gametophyte of a pterodophyte plant, and this gametophyte, it is, I said, it is independent. Sporophyte, it is also independent. Gametophyte also, it is an independent. So both contain chlorophyll. They are capable of living independently. They prepare their own nutrition like that. Now this gametophyte contains reproductive organs called Antheridia and Archegonia. So the male and female reproductive organs, they are called as the Antheridia, and the female are called as the Archegonia. So Antheridia and Archegonia, they are the structures which are formed in the Prothalis. So Antheridia produces the male gametes, the Archegonia produces the female gametes. So the male and female gametes, they undergo fertilization, and zygote is formed in this Prothalis. So usually at the depression region, the Archegonia are produced. So we are not supposed to study all that about Archegonia and that. And so the male are produced at the other end, the female are produced at the other end. So the Archegonia, the Antheridia, they release the sperms, the male gametes, which are actually called as Anthrozoids. So these Anthrozoids, they enter the Archegonia, and in the Archegonia there is the egg cell, female gamete, and that Anthrozoid fuses with the egg cell and forms the zygote. So this zygote which is produced here, it starts developing into a small plant-like structure, and this zygote which produces the plant-like structure, it develops into the sporophyte. So the remaining part of the gametophyte, it gets disintegrated, and thus the gametophyte gives rise to the sporophyte. So this is how the sporophyte is produced in this gametophyte region. So the gametophyte and the sporophyte are independent of each other. But in bryophytes, the sporophyte is completely depending on the gametophyte. Now there is one simple classification of pterodophytes. This pterodophytes are usually classified into 4 classes. So there are 4 groups in pterodophytes. One is Coelentopsida is one group, and Lycopsida, then Spinopsida, then Pteropsida. So these are the 4 classes of pteridophytes. So pteridophytes, they are classified into 4 groups, 4 classes. But bryophytes, only 2 groups there, liverworts and mosses. That is simple classification. Liverworts, they are very simple bryophytes. But whereas mosses are developed bryophytes, there we come across some leaf-like region, stem-like and root-like. In this, again, on the basis of their developments, we come across 4 types of pteridophytes. In the Psilotopsida, we come across an example like Psilotum. This is one example. In Lycopsida, we come across an plant which is called as Selaginella Lycopsida. Then in case of Spinopsida, we come across an example like Equisetum. It is one pteridophyte example. And in case of Pterodopsida, we come across a plant called as Dryopteris. So these are some 4 groups with just mentioning one examples in each class. So write the classification of pteridophytes if that is asked. We have to mention these 4 classes with one example each. So any examples, so there are many more examples, so any one example if we mention, so that is more than sufficient. That is the classification of the pteridophytes. So this is about the pteridophytes. Now coming to the next part, gymnosperms. So gymnosperms, they are also vascular plants, but developed than that of the pteridophytes. Gymnosperms and angiosperms is actually the next group. So these gymnosperms and angiosperms, they are developed when we compare to the pteridophytes. So all these 3 groups, they are vascular plants. But the pteridophytes are primitive. They are non-flowering plants. Gymnosperms and angiosperms, they are developed. So that means these 2 are seed-bearing plants. They contain seeds. But till pteridophytes, we have not mentioned about the formation of the seed. So no question of the seed we come across in pteridophytes. But for the first time in gymnosperms, we come across the formation of the seed. So the gymnosperms are also seed bearing, angiosperms are also seed bearing plants. And the difference between these 2 is the seed in case of gymnosperms, they are naked, but these are covered seeds, angiosperms. That is the difference between gymnosperm and angiosperm. So naked seed and covered seeds, vascular plants, that is common. Pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, all these are vascular. They are well developed. And when we compare to the pteridophytes, gymnosperms grow very tall than that of the pteridophytes. And gymnosperms, they even grow up to several feet or several meters in height. But pteridophytes, they do not grow to that large height. That is why the gymnosperms and pteridophytes, they are different in So the gymnosperms are having naked seeds. The angiosperms are having covered seeds. Then other characters of the gymnosperms. Now here also we come across the Sporophyte and Gametophyte. But the Sporophyte, which contains Sporophylls, here also we come across the Sporophylls. The Sporangia are present in the leaves, which are called as the Sporophylls. Here also Sporophylls are there, but these Sporophylls are not present in the leaf, but they are separate. So this Sporophylls, in case of the Pterodophytes, sometimes they form a cone-like structure, and that cone-like structure is called as strobili, or it is also called as cones. So strobili or cones. So Sporophylls are there, and again here the Sporophylls are of two types in case of Gymnosperms: small and large, microsporophylls and macrosporophylls or megasporophylls. So there are two types of sporophylls, micro and macrosporophylls. That is in case of this Gymnosperm. Now before that, now what is a naked seed and a covered seed, that we shall see. So we have seen seeds, so which we call it as naked and which we call it as covered seeds, enclosed seeds. Now for example, when we see a seed born inside a fruit, it is covered seed. The fruits what we eat commonly, all are angiosperms, isn't it? Take any example. If you take a groundnut plant, even if you take any fruit like tomato or mango or like that. So if we keep a mango fruit, if we keep a tomato, brinjal or any other fruit, apple or any other, so we see that the seeds are not exposed, the seeds are enclosed inside. We can see the fruit wall outside, we can see the seeds are covered inside, they are enclosed inside. So that means the seeds are covered by the fruit wall or the fruit part. So when we see a mango, when we want to see the seed, we have to remove the outer layer, which is the edible part, isn't it? So this seed, it is enclosed seed, it is an angiosperm. Imagine if the outer part of the fruit is not there. So that means only seed is there. It is a naked seeded plant. So imagine in a mango tree, there are mangoes, isn't it? In a tomato tree, plant, there are tomatoes. Imagine the fruit wall is not there. Assume if that mango, only the inside part is hanging, not the outer part which we are eating, only that inside seed is hanging, it is a naked seed plant. It is a naked seed example. So angiosperms are not naked. So in Gymnosperms, in other words, there is no fruit at all. The seeds are directly hanging, the seeds are directly born in the plant. So that is why they are called as naked seeds. So naked seeds means the seeds are not present inside a fruit. So the fruit is absent, in other words. So fruit absent, fruit present. So as the fruit is present, inside the fruit the seeds are enclosed. So as the fruit is absent, the seeds are open, the seeds are naked. That is why naked seeded plants, covered seeded plants. That is the difference between these two. So that is why pterodophytes are developed. But in pterodophytes we don't come across seeds. Followed. And sometimes in pterodophytes also, sporophylls, they form strobili. The sporophylls, they means they are grouped together to form a cone-like structure, which is actually called as a strobili plural. And in pterodophytes, why seed is not formed? Because the development is somewhat simple than that of the gymnosperms when we study the details of the reproduction and all that. It is very simple in pterodophytes. But however, there are some highly developed pterodophytes where there is a tendency of seed formation. Actually, seed is not formed. A seed-like structure is produced in some highly advanced or evolved pterodophytes. That is in case of pterodophytes. Now, coming to the gymnosperms. So the seeds are naked. The sporophylls, they form strobili or cones. Followed. And sometimes, if we come to the roots, in some plants, the roots are having a symbiotic association with some organisms. Symbiotic association means it is a kind of mutual help between the organisms. So in some plants, for example, in pinus plant, this is an example of gymnosperm. In pinus, what happens? The roots of the pinus are infected by some fungus or some fungi. So this root which is infected with some fungus, it is called as mycorrhiza. So such roots are called as mycorrhiza. So mycorrhiza means roots infected with fungus as a symbiotic association. So when we say infected with fungus means that fungus is not parasite on the roots of pinus. So it is having a symbiotic association with the roots. So fungus helps the plant helps the fungus. Just like in the leguminous roots, rhizobium, same. So the fungus helps in the absorption of the minerals from the soil, and the pinus root provides food and shelter to the fungus. This is symbiotic association, that is called as mycorrhiza. And even in another example, in cycas, the roots are also infected with the cyanobacteria. So we have studied cyanobacteria in kingdom Monera. Under kingdom Monera, bacteria, cyanobacteria, archaebacteria, they are the examples, mycoplasma and all that. Cyanobacteria, they contain blue-green pigments, so they are also called as blue-green algae. Example, nostoc, oscillatoria, anabina, and many others. So here what happens, the roots of the cycas, they are infected with cyanobacteria. This is also symbiotic relationship. So these roots which are infected with, they are actually called as coralloid roots. Here it is called as mycorrhiza. Actually myco means fungus, mycota, mycology. So rhiza means root. So coralloid roots in case of cycas, they are called as. So in case of cycas, what happens? The roots near the soil, not deep. So in cycas we come across roots and its branches. The roots nearer to the soil surface, they get infected with the cyanobacteria. And these roots which are present, they are having a particular type of growth like this, a type of finger-like projections. So these roots appear like a coral. So coral means it is a name of an animal coming under phylum Coelenterata. So you have studied about phylum. So phylum Porifera, Coelenterata, Platyhelminthes, Annelida, Arthropoda, mollusca, and so on. So in phylum Coelenterata, we come across an example called as corals, brain coral, like that different corals are there. So these roots, they resemble the coral animal, hence they are called as the coralloid roots. So oid means like, resembling. Whenever you say, hey, you are like this, you are like that, we are comparing one individual to another. hey, you are like a monkey or something like that we will be telling. So like means we are comparing. So coralloid roots means coral like roots. They do not they resemble the coral, and hence they are called as the coralloid roots. So these coralloid roots they are also symbiotic. Now symbiotic in the sense the cyanobacteria helps in nitrogen fixation. The plant provides food and shelter to the cyanobacteria. That cyanobacteria may be any, it may be nostoc or anabina or anyone. So that is coralloid roots. Then the male and female, coming to the reproduction, the strobilus are of two types, the male and female strobilus, the male and female cones. So the male cone is actually called as microsporophyll, the female is actually the megasporophyll. So these megasporophylls are seen, and they produce the naked seeds. Then another important character is the leaves of these plants, gymnosperms, they can withstand extreme conditions. So extreme conditions in the sense they can withstand extreme temperatures, and these leaves, that is why the plants can live even in dry conditions, or they are xerophytic in nature. That is about this gymnosperms. So gymnosperms, in this we come across different examples. Cycas is one example, Pinus is one example, Natum is another example, and there are other examples like this conifers are one group of plants which come under this. Then there are still other examples. So then when we say angiosperms, already we have mentioned they are developed than gymnosperms because the seeds are well covered inside the fruit, and almost all the plants, fruits, vegetables, what we are consuming, all they belong to the angiosperms group. So angiosperms, they are further divided into dicotyledons and monocotyledons, but here we don't come across any dicot and monocot. And these of course they are having well developed stem, root and leaves. Then the angiosperms, they are having flowers. So these are flowering plants, that is very important. So angiosperms are flowering plants, but here we don't mention about flowers. So we don't call anything reproductive structure as a flower here. So of course the flowering plants, the flowers which are produced by the angiosperms, they develop into the fruits and seeds, which are where the seeds are well covered. And another important thing in this is there is a process called as the double fertilization. So here that is a peculiar type of reproduction in the case of this angiosperms. This is about the plant kingdom, and these are the groups of the plant kingdom.